Good morning. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces, so many new faces. My name is Caroline Murphy. I am the Vice President of Advancement and Philanthropic Services. I've had a title change in the last year. Sorry for that. And I have the honor and privilege of getting to do this work every day. I have been here for over 11 years, grew up in MetroWest, as I was just sharing with some friends at the table. And this is a real true pleasure to get to be here on stage with someone I deeply admire and have enjoyed getting to know over the last year. So what we hope for today's conversation, for those of you who were here with us last year, we had a fantastic panel conversation last year talking about the concept of moving from reactive giving to more intentional philanthropy and tools and tips and guidance on how to effectively do that. Some of our panelists from last year and our moderator are in the room today, so thanks for joining us again. And what we hope today really sheds light on is more stories of philanthropy. So you heard Mary Beth and her family's story of philanthropy and how they come to it. You heard Donna and John and their story of philanthropy and how they come to it. And with Holly today, our hope is really that you see another thoughtful and intentional example of philanthropy, and that it inspires you to walk away today with some tips and ideas, whether you're starting your journey or you're in the midst of your journey with philanthropy. Just another example of how you can show up for community and how this all works. So Holly's going to share some successes and challenges, many successes, some challenges, and hiccups along the way. Her story of how she even got here today. And so it's a really, really exciting opportunity to be up here with Holly. So my job is to introduce Holly, which is a significant undertaking, but I'm going to try and do it very succinctly. Some people really talk about changing the world, and Holly is building one. A self-described social entrepreneur, a farm girl turned New Yorker, a mom of 2 teenagers, Holly brings what she calls her Appalachian-formed heart and her McKinsey-trained brain to her work. After 13 impressive years as a senior partner at McKinsey, she made a really bold shift. She chose to focus not on problems that moved the stock market, but on those that changed lives. Today, she is the co-founder of Nido de Esperanza in New York City, working alongside immigrant mothers and their young children, the co-founder of the Bridge Project, a groundbreaking direct cash assistance program supporting babies and families during the first 1,000 days of life. She is also the co-principal of the Monarch Foundation, her family foundation. And at the center of all of that impressive work is her belief in trust, which we'll talk a lot about today, especially trust in women. And as a powerful force for change, please join me in welcoming Holly Fogle, a bold change maker, to our stage today.
Thank you, Caroline.
I hope I did it justice. It's a bit of a fangirl moment for me because I've gotten to know Holly over the last year, and I'm always just so inspired and so impressed by her story and how she thinks about her work and how she talks about it and how she shows up every single day as her true, authentic self in this work. And one of the things that always really inspires me and I just find so much joy in is your story about the church ladies as a formative part of your life. So if you'll indulge me and the entire audience here, I'd love if you could start at the beginning and really talk about your early moments and your experiences that have sort of shaped how you came to your philanthropy today and how you think about community.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you for coming out. I have to say, you will hear the church lady story, but I grew up pretty poor on the Ohio-West Virginia border, where West Virginia gets really skinny. I'm on the Ohio side of that. A little town of 300 people. We grew up outside of town, literally the end of a dirt road in a coal miner's house. My parents still live there today. My sister lives there today. My family on both sides had been in that county for over 200 years, since before Ohio was a state. So deep ties. And, I didn't realize we were poor. My husband, who grew up in the middle of New Jersey, said I missed a lot of contextual clues. But the other day he said to me, "Where did those railroad tracks go behind your house?" I'm like, "To the dynamite factory." He goes, "Another." Like literally, it's 2 months ago. He's like, "Another contextual clue." Like middle-class people don't live next to dynamite factories. I'm like, it just was what it was. But what's interesting, I think, about that is I didn't feel poor because it was this community of abundance. And I grew up sitting in rooms that were not as pretty as this, but with folding chairs and plastic tables in a church basement. In this little town, there was a Methodist church and a Catholic church. We were Methodist. That was like the big divide. And these women were beyond powerful. And, you know, it was the notion of like the church needs a new roof. No one has $12,000. But what that means is we're going to have to hold a lot of spaghetti dinners for years to get there. We raised our own cows, so we always had a freezer full of beef. People raised tomatoes. They had a freezer full of tomatoes. You put that together, that's a spaghetti dinner. You do that 20 times, you get a new church roof. And I just saw them over and over again. You know, children would be killed and the parents wouldn't have money to bury them. And these women would say, no one should bury a child alone. And at that moment, be worried about a coffin and a funeral expense. And they would come together, the Catholics and the Methodists, and bury that child and make that dinner. And so I sat at the feet of these women, not recognizing what they were doing, just recognizing this was my life. And they said over and over again, of whom much is given, much is required. They didn't say expected, they said required. And they did not mean money because no one had it. They just meant we had beef, you have tomatoes, you have space to do X, Y, Z. And they just did it. And so I grew up just seeing this notion of, I think, love in action and this deep, deep notion that we belonged to each other. And, you know, their voice is like in my brain, I was saying to Donna, like all the time, because I think that's what has infused so many of the decisions I've made. It infuses how I try to mother. But when I walked away from McKinsey, I just kept thinking like I was one of the youngest female partners the firm had elected. I was like, I had some real shots at doing some interesting things there. But it's like, I can't just spend the rest of my life making CEOs' stock prices go up when there is so much other work that my heart was being called to.
I mean, it's such an impressive story. And I think last year, as I mentioned, we talked a lot about sort of moving to more intentional philanthropy. And you mentioned your shift from McKinsey. You had a significant role there. You had all this success. What brought you to sort of that shift? I think would be really interesting to share with folks. And how's your thought of impact sort of evolved over time? Have you had any of those aha moments? What made you walk away? And what did that process look like? I know that's a heavy one.
It's a heavy one, but you know, I think I've had a lot, as you can imagine, when I first, and I guess the other piece of this story is, so I go from Appalachia to Penn, to Wharton, and the reason I got there was because I had read and I didn't know what smart people did other than to be a doctor or a lawyer. I didn't want to be either one because I didn't think I'd be very good at either one. I decided I want to be a CEO of a Fortune 500 steel company. So these are the only like business people I see in my world. So I'm like, where are the best business schools in the country? I go to the library, I read the list. My kids who are born in New York City have an incredible private school education. Like, Mom, you're such a moron. Like, you applied to Penn. Like, it was the only place I applied of the Ivy Leagues because it was the only one on the list. Like, I didn't know that I could have gone to Princeton and got an economics degree and it would have worked. Like, it wasn't on the list. But so I don't for 1 minute take for granted a room like this or an education like I got, which then enabled me to end up at McKinsey, enabled me to be thinking about some of the hardest problems out there. But I always felt this calling, as I mentioned to you. And early on, I was in our 20s, and I said to my husband, who's a son of a union electrician, I met him at Penn, I just think we're meant to do something else. And he's like, we have a mortgage, like, you need to focus. I'm like, fair. But how that has evolved over time is, I think, this notion of the wealth that he has created really in our lives now. He got really lucky. He was employee number 4 at a place called Insight. He's a venture capitalist. Now they manage $90 billion. So, like, yes, we're smart, yes, we're hardworking, and yes, we got really, really lucky. And so I feel like the wealth that we have is sort of like monopoly money. But I take it really seriously because I know what it means to not have money for dinner. And so I don't dole out grants easily. Like, it really sort of sinks into my soul. He's like, I don't think it's that complicated. Like, this is kind of his perspective in life. It's just not that complicated. I'm like, but it is, to do it well in the way that I wanted to do it. And so I felt a lot of burden, frankly. on this journey of how to do it the way I wanted to do it, and that would live up to the vision of these old church ladies. And so we had given through a DAF for a long, long time, anonymously, quietly. We are not people that like naming rights and buildings. But I started to think a lot about the social capital that I also had, and the rooms like this that I got to sit in, and was realizing how much I was leaving on the table. And frankly, how irritated those old church ladies would have been at me, because I was using a piece of my gift, but not the whole gift. And so we started a foundation called the Monarch Foundation. The reason we call it that is, many of you probably, I mean, butterflies are beautiful. But what a lot of people don't know is one butterfly doesn't make that whole journey. It's 4 or 5 generations of butterflies to make that trip. So at the Monarch Foundation, we take on early childhood poverty and we take on climate. Both problems we are likely not going to solve in our lifetime. But I feel like I've got to take one leg of that journey and run it well. And so I think part of what has been a huge piece of how we think about things is I've always been an audacious dreamer. And I think sometimes we diminish our power by taking things and just saying, well, what can I accomplish just today or just in this corner of the world? Versus like, how am I a bigger part of this journey? And so that to me has really informed how we think about things. And I think the longer I'm at this work, the more impatient I get, but also the bolder I get on it all.
God, I could do this all day. So this is going to be a hard thing to stop at some point. So you mentioned your husband, Jeff, and you mentioned obviously that you're accomplishing this philanthropy together. I work with couples and families all the time through our work at the foundation, and just knowing sort of the reality that everybody comes to the table with different passions and interests and different approaches and different intent and goals. What does that look like for you all? Are you working together? How does it look like to work together? How does it look like to work independently? Do you always agree?
Definitely not, but I always win. I will say it's interesting because I described to you my childhood. He grew up in this middle class environment, really good public school education, but I grew up with deep abundance as a mindset. He grew up with deep scarcity. His mother had a lot of trauma. His dad was this union electrician. In her mind, he was always one job away from like everybody getting evicted and there's no food on the table. So I think Jeff is very much like, we have this money, we can hold on to this money, it's compounding, I'm an excellent investor, we will eventually do something with this money. I am like, we have hungry babies, and like, this money is moving, baby. So he's always like, you're a lot, and like, that's great. But I will say what we have done, I think he is my best kitchen cabinet. He is the love of my life. And I talk to him every night. I would say this infuses a huge piece of our conversation. It's infused a huge piece of how we parent. But at the end of the day, I also do have things that he does by himself. So there's certain things we do a lot of together. But then we have a climate investing portfolio. He's really good at that. And I just let him do that. And so there's a lot of crosstalk. But I think the biggest tension has been this sort of scarcity versus abundance, and the pace at which we're going to move the money, the seriousness with which we're going to move this money. You know, in his mind, it's like, if we're feeding babies, that's enough. I'm like, but we could change the world. So like, yes, I'm going to feed the babies, but like, there is so much more we should do, and like, I could do it, or like, we should try. And he's like, I'm exhausted. So I would say this is the tension that we live every day still, very much.
So those conversations are happening daily, all the time. And you live so close to sort of the reality of your philanthropy. And
yes.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned your kids and how you parent. So it's sort of really shaped how you parent.
Yes.
Can you talk about that? With 2 young adult children who are coming into their own, how do you set an example? How do you model philanthropy for them? How do you think about that? I mean, we know that philanthropy in many times is a family affair, moving generationally. It's transitioning generationally. Those values can feel very strong as a family. How does that show up for you as a parent?
I think the word you hit on, Carolyn, is how we've really thought about it, is values. So to me, I don't know if our kids will want to do this philanthropic work longer term. It's real work, as you all know. And it can be a burden, and it's not their burden to bear. So they may or may not join me in this over time. But to me, what was really important is that they were raised with serious values of how we need to show up in the world, particularly given the privilege they have grown up in. So, I will say we go to church every Sunday, very important to us. But we have this huge sign, this neon sign in our living room, Hank Willis Thomas, who's maybe some of you guys know, that says love over rules, which has a lot of meanings, right? Love over rules, but love over rules. And I will say from the time they've been really little, because it's always about showing, not talking, as we all know as parents, like talk is cheap. So pretty much every Saturday they got carted off to Nido de Esperanza up in Washington Heights, not far from our house, working with undocumented families. And when they were little, that was like mopping floors, which I think like tedious jobs are fantastic for little people. And over time, right, it evolved into other things. But when my son went to college and was writing his Common App, he started it by saying, I go to work with my mom every Saturday. And went on to say that in his life, what that has meant to him and how he thinks about me and how he wants to show up in the world, which meant a lot to me as a mom. And he has a very generous spirit, as does my daughter, who's different and feisty and just like me. So my husband's like, I have two of you. It's really a lot. But I think this notion of what is our obligation to our neighbor and how do we love each other fully as people and how do we show up for each other in this world? I never wanted them to feel like they've grown up in this bubble. And New York City's hard to be a bubble because you ride the subways, you do these things. But I've made a real effort to make sure they're in it. And then when John turned 20, we've now set up a DAF for him separately. And with the obligation that even though he doesn't have to give away 5%, he does from our roles. And so I think that is just going to be a good thing over time. And we sit down, we have family meetings, we talk about the foundation. We'll see where that goes with them.
So with his DAF, have you been pleasantly surprised by his use of it? Has he come to you for advice? Has he talked to your husband? What does that look like? He's interesting. He's a very independent person. And so he's been thinking a lot about regenerative agriculture, not my area. And he's very interested in that whole sort of field. And we just bought no collar sheep thing. It's a whole thing. Chestnut trees and all of that. And I love that because I think, part of what Jeff and I just went through this process in the last 5 years of if we both got hit by a bus, what happens? And how do you think about the direction we would give to our children? And we really talked a lot about I care so much about babies and women and health of these families, but they might not, and that's okay. And so far, John seems to be much more interested in sheep and soil. So it's okay. I mean, it's great. Did it take you a little while, though? Sorry to pull on this string a little bit. I'm just curious. Did it take you a while to get comfortable with the fact that it wasn't going to maybe mirror or include what you were interested in and what your philanthropy has looked like? Did that matter to you?
No, I think it does. It does matter, right? And I think it's an ongoing thing. And our daughter just turned 18. And she's off to Middlebury to play soccer. The kid only wants to play soccer and drink matcha. That is basically her life right now. So I'm I don't know how the second one's going to turn out. We'll see. And I could imagine her being much more interested in, sports clubs and community. And she might just do something totally different again.
So it transitions nicely to sort of this concept of, your comfort in allowing them to do their own philanthropy. And philanthropy, as we know, is full of a lot of successes, but a lot of people look at it as something that, we want to see the tangible outcome. How do we see we talked about it earlier again, the number of books that are being given out, the number of meals that are being served, the number of people being impacted, the number of people being housed. Those are really important. Yeah. But, those tangible outcomes, the successes, to talk to me about the challenges, the mistakes, the hiccups that come with this too. We know that philanthropy isn't always perfect. Last year we talked a lot about doing and learning through sometimes the mistakes or the challenges that arise. You've had a lot of successes in your philanthropy, but what about some of the challenges?
Oh, and plenty of failures. Plenty of failures. I mean, as you guys might surmise, I love a spreadsheet. I love an ROI. Like, I love metrics. Like, it is my love language. And also, I think the more I am at this, the more I recognize that I kid myself that that is actually the impact. And so the more I'm at this, the more, to me, this becomes about finding incredible leaders that we deeply, deeply believe in, and then letting them do what they need to do in different ways. And so we had as part of our climate work and community work, parks are a very important thing to folks in New York City, and particularly in poor communities. It is actually their outdoor living room. So it's where every birthday is celebrated because the apartments are too small. And so this becomes the place that they can be together. So some of you may know, there's beautiful parks in New York City. The beautiful parks are supported by a lot of private dollars. So the city's very fair in terms of its money that gets spread across all 5 boroughs, but why Central Park is so incredible is the Central Park Conservancy has additional $80 million to spend on Central Park. If you live in Brownsville, Brooklyn, you don't have a Central Park Conservancy. So those parks are pretty decrepit. So I was like, we should be able to like help parks. Not so easy. But I'm like, I can get a meeting with the parks commissioner. Like, we can have discussions. We have money, right? Like, let's go. And I will say, what massive failure because of the bureaucracy of that whole situation, because of like ridiculous cost. And you know, some of the things that people had said work when you really dig into it didn't work that well. So it wasn't clear to me we had great models. So the woman who ran that bit of our foundation for us was like, that was a disaster. Like, we spent a few $1 million and had very little to show for it. And I think like it was a failure. But what came out of it is we actually met this incredible woman named Rose Harvey, who had been the parks commissioner, who came to us a year ago and then said, would you give me a grant for $250,000 because I want to take a run at the New York City public housing green spaces. And I was like, if there is, and I said to Jeff, low probability this works, like single digits, I would say. But if anybody can do it, it's Rose. And gosh, we know how important that would be. So we wrote her this grant. That was that. It was just a request. Like, I had known her now for 2 years. I love this woman. We wrote her the grant. She just got $15 million of funding to launch her first pilot 1 year later. So I say to Caroline, who's always like, our park work was such a fiasco, like the ripple effects though of that, of the people we've met, the programs we continue to support in these communities, and then something like this, that who knows where that will go. So I always just say, like, we just have to keep learning. What I think is a failure is if we throw good money after bad. That we're pretty disciplined about. But recognizing that money leads to people and leaders and opportunity and new experiences, I'm all in.
I love that. I think, you know, obviously with some of these challenges, you've shared with me unintended consequences and the discomfort and challenges that come along with that, being in an abundance of wealth, and you know, the concept of being uncomfortable, the concept of being comfortable. Talk about how you think about that in terms of your work in particular.
Yeah, if any of you are Enneagram fans, I'm an Enneagram 8, which basically is like I am a heat-seeking missile to like the most vulnerable people in the world, which my husband's always like, holy moly. But McKinsey had a phrase that said we needed to porpoise. And what that meant at McKinsey is you stay up here at the top in sort of the strategic level of the C-suite, but then you need to go really deep to the bottom of the seabed, and you need to get all the facts and the data and hear from the customers and hear from the employees deep, deep, deep in the problem we're trying to solve. And then you need to come back up to breathe. And in that repeated porpoising is where we find the elegant solution that could be really hidden. So I think because that was my training for almost 14 years of my professional life, it's the same lens I apply to my philanthropy. So before I do anything, I have to be really proximate. And Brian Stevens, who's one of my huge heroes, says that's one of the 4 things that we have to do. He also says we need to do things that are uncomfortable and inconvenient. And I say that to my kids every day. What did you do today that was uncomfortable and inconvenient? But in that porpoising early on in this neighborhood of Washington Heights, to tell you a story, which is the neighborhood Lin-Manuel Miranda's made famous, It is a community of barbell wealth. So you have New York Presbyterian and Columbia and Yeshiva, really good jobs. And you have a vast immigrant community that's living in a single room and living rooms divided by garbage bags into four, where there's four other families living there. So when we first set up Nido de Esperanza, my first sort of foray into the nonprofit world, we were like, we're gonna do this in a way that sees people, not problems. We're not gonna just be about books or diapers or food. We're gonna be about the family and what this woman needs. And early on, a woman came through and she had this baby. The baby's crying, she's a mess, and the bottle is full of something that's brown. And so my social worker who was in the lead, I answered the door. My social worker, I get her, the bottle has Coca-Cola in it. And I have to say, I understood in sort of 20 seconds. Like, it took me a little while, because like, what is that? And then I understood what that was. And I judged her so fast and so swiftly, and got my social worker. And as that story unfolded, she had signed her WIC certificate, but in her house, not in front of the bodega owner. He confiscated it, which he's allowed to do. It was going to take her 2 more weeks to get a new WIC certificate. And in that 2 weeks, she had no way to feed her baby. So she was filling that bottle with Coca-Cola to keep the baby alive. And I have to say, that night I went home and cried for so many reasons. One of just how, as in one of the richest cities, in one of the richest countries in the world, could a woman show up at my doorstep with Coca-Cola in her bottle? How could I, for 1 second, assume that she was a terrible mother? And then, like, how are we gonna do something else about that? So, I think for me, my heart breaks a lot. And my husband's always like, you should buy more art. Like, let's do something else. Like, we're not watching that documentary. Susan, you just sent me another one. I watched it on the ride up because I was like, Jeff's gonna kill me if we watch Resilience tonight. It was good, by the way. It was very good. I would recommend it. But I think this notion of being close to the issues, it keeps me grounded, it keeps me humble, and it keeps me really listening to what people need. And I think as long as I'm doing that, whatever failures I make, it's gonna be okay.
And that discomfort. I mean, you face it, that inconvenience, you recognize through your work that other people are living these inconveniences and discomforts every single day, and put yourself in those shoes. It's pretty incredible. So I want to transition a little bit to a little bit more about some of the work you're doing on the ground as a result of your philanthropy. So as I mentioned, I met Holly about a year ago, thanks to Katie Collins in an introduction, one of my other favorite people in the room. And it's just an incredible organization. I was immediately taken sort of by what you were attempting to accomplish and the successes you had already had and how quickly it was growing. And that was the first time I heard her story, and I was immediately a fan. And they were expanding to Boston at the time, which has been a wild success. Well, thanks
which is to many of the folks in this
so
room,
exciting.
Yes.
And as a community foundation, really thinking about the needs and the issues here in the hyper-local community, and recognizing what the Bridge Project was trying to accomplish, and seeing those needs right here in MetroWest. Really thinking, how do we get a piece of this? How do we support moms and babies here? What does this look like for us? And so we've been exploring that, which is exciting. The foundation has made their first grant to the Bridge Project as of last year, and we're really excited to hopefully be able to bring this project here and to impact moms and babies. And so for those who aren't familiar with the Bridge Project, maybe didn't look you up in advance of today, can you just give a little bit of a quick overview and sort of what makes it so special?
Thank you. So the Bridge Project is, in a nutshell, it's simple. It is direct cash into the hands of a pregnant woman starting in her 3rd trimester for the next 1,000 years of her 1,000 days of her baby's life. 1,000 years would be a long time. 1,000 days of her baby's life. And the genesis of that was, the Nido, that organization I just told you about, during COVID, we'd been doing a lot of really deep services, a lot of case management, really seeing these women. When COVID hit, of course, New York City's on lockdown at first, as the rest of the country follows. And these women don't have any safety net because they're undocumented. And so they were literally calling us saying, we don't have food, we don't have formula, we don't have an eviction moratorium, we need help. And so we responded with cash, because when you're close to people that you love and care about, you figure out what you've got to do. And so we'd never done cash before. As an organization, we got it in their hands. And that was my light bulb moment, because I have been struggling my whole philanthropic journey with, like, I love a grassroots organization for probably all the reasons you can all surmise. And to move money at scale, it's hard, $10,000 at a time, unless you have a huge team, which I don't. So I had this aha moment when COVID hit of like, whoa, these women are using this money really well, really efficiently. It started to check off all these boxes for me of like the McKinsey ROI, my Appalachian dignity, that people know what they need to do with their own lives. And so I thought, let's figure out if I could create this at scale just for Jeff and I as part of the Monarch Foundation. And so that was my goal. We move $10 million per year of our own money through into the hands of pregnant women. I am good at checklists, so like check. But what I also then quickly realized is I had to create pretty good pipes to do that. And we have a bunch of friends who care about people too, but don't have the time or the team that I had to figure this out. And so they were like, Holly, could you like do this for Connecticut? Could you do this for, Tennessee? And I'm like, well, not quite. But then I was like, actually, like I could, right? So we spun Bridge out. It's its own 501c3. It's 5 years old right now. Penn does research for us. Columbia does research for us. We have an in-house research team. But as Caroline said, we're in 12 states already. We're closing in on 4,000 babies. We'll move probably close to $40 million this year through it. Some of my money, but mostly not my money. Susie Buffett is working with us in Omaha as she thinks about how is she going to move money at scale going forward. Jen Gates has signed on to do Maryland because we have Governor Moore on board to really work very closely. And we're headed to Arkansas in a month, which is the highest teenage pregnancy rate in the country. And so I think that one's going to be really, really interesting. But I think what's exciting about it to me is this notion of people rallying for their neighbors. And so I think in Boston, Susan Benford, who's one of my champions and fellow travelers on this journey, and Katie Collins and folks like you, Carolyn, came together and said, let's do this in Boston. And I said, let's do it in Boston. And we were like, okay, if we can raise $2 million, that's always our goal. We could reach 100 families for those 3 years. Well, they blew past $2 million in Boston in like 2 months. So Boston now has 250 families enrolled. And we're off to the races in a really, really big way. And just to give you guys a sense, like in Boston, the average household income of a family enrolled in the Bridge Project is $14,000. And the average age of a mother is 29. And so I don't know, when diapers cost $1,000 a year, how you, well, I do know like what they do. They're forced to make impossible decisions of not eating protein and all kinds of things to be able to make sure that baby has diapers. But I think it's been pretty incredible. So we want to do this in MetroWest too, and are grateful for your guys' support and cheerleading.
Yeah, no, I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to economic mobility and really trusting. I told Holly at one of the events I went to for the Bridge Project about 6 months ago, I have they make these beautiful bracelets that say Trust Moms on them, and it sits on my desk every day at my computer. And I think it's a really powerful thing that we talked a little bit about of, yes, there are the outcomes, there's the data, and the research you all are doing, which you referenced, is incredible, with some really amazing partners and the outcomes that you're seeing. But there's also just this belief that someone's in their corner, and not to negate the importance and the value of what that means. And I think building community, you have talked about like the WhatsApp groups and that they're all sharing resources with each other and talking. And so talk to me about what community means to you. I mean, it's a word, obviously, it's in our name. It's something we deeply believe in here. What does it mean to you? How has it shown up in your life?
It has been something, well, you heard my Appalachia story. I think it was foundational. And I think the longer I'm on this journey, the more I keep coming back to how deeply important it was for me as a person then, and also now as a philanthropist. Because as I mentioned to you all, I find this journey to be a bit lonely. Often very lonely, because no one feels that bad, right? Oh, you have so much money and it's so hard to give it away. That must be really challenging. Like, no one feels that bad. Like, you can't really have that conversation at a dinner party. Like, well, let me help you, right? But I think when you find folks like you all who are serious about the intent and recognizing that this money that you all are sharing with your community really matters to people. And it does, it really, really matters. But I think doing it in community with other people, for me, even at that level, at a philanthropist level, has become so darn important. And I think it gives me courage, it gives me staying power, and it brings me incredible joy. And so for me personally, it's so important. And then I think separately, I see for our moms, you know, to your point, Caroline, how important it is for them of saying, oh, you'll watch, what we see in our WhatsApp groups on our Bridge Moms is they're connecting with each other saying, could you watch my baby while I go to the doctor? Is anybody coming by my neighborhood because my car broke down and I need a ride? Does anyone know when that soup kitchen's opening up? Like they're sharing and networking with each other, and that builds something that is so important too. And I think this notion of joy and hope, we need it just as people.
I mean, I could sit up here for hours, and I'm being told that we're near time. So I will do the right thing by all of our guests who have lives to move on to today. But I've just loved getting the chance to get to know you over the last year. I've loved getting the chance to sit with you here. Thank you for being so vulnerable and honest and open and just being a force. I mean, I think hopefully everybody took something away from this conversation. Such an inspiration. Talking about abundance, talking about your family and working with your husband and setting examples and modeling for your children, your values, your story and your beginnings, just all of it. This is the hardest question, so I'm going to end with this one. There are people here who might be starting their journey in philanthropy. There might be people who are in a middle stage or really settled in their philanthropy. If you could give one piece of advice to people walking out today, what would you say to them?
I think that it is in fact a journey, and just to take a step. I think that's the most important thing you can do. And if you're proximate, you'll take the right step, even if it's not the right step initially. And I think that the bonus part of that is to be bold. I think we underestimate our power. And again, I invoke those old church ladies every day because they had so much power and yet no money, right? And I think the power, we have all of that. Like we have social capital, we have financial capital. You have this room of people, community leaders who know what people need on the ground. And so, I mean, I think what I would implore you all to do is to be bolder and to step into that power. And so if there's a grant you're thinking about, double it. If there's a place you're gonna go see, take a friend. We need each other and the world needs us right now.
What a great way to end. Holly, thank you for saying yes to this.